They say you never know who you're serving until it's too late. For 23-year-old Cassie Martinez, that truth walked through the door of Rosie's diner every Tuesday and Thursday at 6:47 a.m. sharp, an invisible old man that everyone ignored. She had no idea that her simple acts of kindness were being recorded, documented, and would eventually lead to 4 bodyguards, 2 lawyers, and an inheritance that would shake her entire world. But before we get to that moment that'll make your jaw drop, you need to understand how a broke waitress with a heart of gold became the most unexpected heiress in American history. Stick around, because what happens in the final 5 minutes of this story will absolutely blow your mind. The neon sign outside Rosie's diner flickered between the words, "Open 24/7, and darkness, a metaphor Cassie Martinez found painfully accurate for her own life. At 23, she was stuck in a cycle of darkness and brief flickers of hope that never lasted long enough. It was 5:45 a.m. on a freezing Tuesday in November when Cassie tied her grease-stained apron around her waist and prepared for another soul-crushing shift. The diner smelled like burnt coffee, old grease, and broken dreams, pretty much how her life felt lately. Table 6 needs ketchup, and Table 9 is asking why their eggs are taking so damn long, barked Tommy, the perpetually angry cook who looked like he'd been born pissed off at the world. On it, Cassie replied, grabbing the ketchup bottle while simultaneously balancing 3 plates of hash browns on her other arm. This was her talent, juggling chaos while maintaining a smile that never quite reached her eyes. Rosie's diner was located in the sketchy part of downtown Detroit, wedged between a pawn shop and a laundromat that definitely laundered more than just clothes. The clientele was a mixture of night shift workers, homeless folks seeking warmth, truck drivers passing through, and the occasional drug dealer conducting business meetings over cold coffee. Cassie had been working there for 3 years, ever since her mom died from cancer and left her with $47,000 in medical debt. Her associate's degree in nursing had become useless paper when she'd had to drop out of the RN program to take care of her mom full-time. Now, at 23, she was grinding 70-hour weeks across 2 jobs just to keep the debt collectors from completely destroying her credit. It was 6:47 a.m., she glanced at the clock out of habit, when he walked in. The old man was maybe 75, maybe 80, it was hard to tell. He wore the same thing every time, a threadbare gray cardigan that had seen better decades, brown corduroy pants that were too short, revealing mismatched socks, and shoes that were held together with what looked like duct tape and prayer. His face was weathered like old leather left in the sun too long, with deep wrinkles that told stories of hard years. But it was his eyes that got Cassie, pale blue, watery, but somehow still kind. Like he'd seen terrible things but refused to let them make him terrible. "Morning, sir," Cassie greeted him with a genuine smile, one of the few real ones she had left. "Your usual table?" The old man nodded slowly, shuffling toward the corner booth by the window. The one nobody else wanted because the vinyl was torn and the heater didn't quite reach that far in winter. This had become their routine. Every Tuesday and Thursday, 6:47 a.m. like clockwork. He'd sit in that same booth, order the same thing, black coffee, 1 sugar, no cream, and if he had enough change, a plain bagel, untoasted. What broke Cassie's heart was watching him count out his money. He'd pull coins from different pockets, laying them on the table in careful piles, calculating if he had enough. Some mornings he did. Some mornings he didn't. "Coffee, black, 1 sugar," Cassie said, already pouring it. "And you know what? Chef Tommy made way too many bagels this morning. Like, way too many. We're just gonna have to throw them out unless someone eats them. Would you be doing me a huge favor and taking one off our hands?" It was a lie. Tommy made exactly the number of bagels he needed and guarded them like a dragon hoarding gold. But Cassie had started paying for the old man's bagels out of her own tips 3 months ago. Her tips that she desperately needed, but somehow couldn't stand the thought of this old man going hungry. The old man's eyes crinkled with emotion. That's very kind of you, miss. Cassie. My name's Cassie." She placed the coffee and bagel in front of him. "And it's not kind, it's just smart business. Can't have good food going to waste, right?" He wrapped his weathered hands around the coffee mug, seeking its warmth. "Cassie. That's a beautiful name. What's yours?" she asked, like she did every time. And like every time, he simply smiled and said, "Just an old man, darling. Just an old man." The other waitresses, Destiny and Brenda, thought Cassie was crazy for wasting time on the old guy. "Girl, he tips like 50 cents on a $2 coffee," Destiny had said last week, snapping her gum. "Why you even bothering? You got better tables to work." But Cassie couldn't explain it. There was something about the old man's loneliness that mirrored her own. Something about the way society had made him invisible that made her determined to see him. So every Tuesday and Thursday, she'd refill his coffee without him asking. She'd sit for a few minutes when the diner was slow, asking about his day, telling him about hers. She'd make sure the heat was turned up near his booth. She'd sneak him an extra bagel that was gonna get tossed anyway. He never said much. Mostly just listened, nodding occasionally, his eyes distant like he was somewhere else. But sometimes, when Cassie would tell him about her struggles, the debt, the exhaustion, the fear that this was all her life would ever be, he'd reach across the table and pat her hand. "You're a good soul, Cassie," he'd say in his raspy voice. "The world needs more people like you." Those words kept her going more than he'd ever know. What Cassie didn't know was that she was being watched. Every Tuesday and Thursday, parked across the street in a black Mercedes SUV with tinted windows, sat two people: Gerald Stevenson, attorney at law with the prestigious firm Stevenson and Associates, and Marcus Chen, head of security for one of the wealthiest families in America. They had notebooks. They had cameras with long-range lenses. They had audio recording equipment that could pick up conversations through glass. And they were documenting everything. "She just paid for his breakfast again," Marcus noted, making a mark in his ledger. "That's the 47th time in 3 months." Gerald adjusted his glasses, watching through binoculars as Cassie laughed at something the old man said. "She makes approximately $18,000 a year, based on our financial investigation. She has $47,000 in debt. She works 73 hours a week across 2 jobs. And she's spending roughly $15 a week on food for a homeless stranger." "Not homeless," Marcus corrected. "But she doesn't know that." Gerald nodded, making notes. "What's fascinating is that she doesn't do it for recognition. She lies to him, tells him the food would go to waste. She preserves his dignity." "The boss is going to want to see this footage," Marcus said. "The boss has been watching the live feed every Tuesday and Thursday for 3 months, Gerald replied with a slight smile. "Why do you think we're still here?" Inside the diner, Cassie was refilling the old man's coffee for the 3rd time. "You know, you never told me your name," she said, sitting across from him during a rare slow moment. The old man smiled mysteriously. "Names are funny things, aren't they? Sometimes they carry too much weight. Too many expectations." "That's deep for 6 in the morning," Cassie laughed. "You some kind of philosopher?" "Just someone who's lived long enough to see what matters and what doesn't." "Yeah? So what matters?" The old man looked at her with those watery blue eyes. "This. Right here. A young woman with her own struggles taking time to see an old man that the rest of the world walks past. That's what matters, Cassie. Kindness when you have nothing to gain from it." Cassie felt tears prick her eyes but blinked them back. "You're not invisible to me." "I know," he said softly. "That's why you matter." 6 weeks later, on a particularly brutal Thursday in January, Cassie arrived at work to find an eviction notice taped to her apartment door. She had 7 days to come up with $1,800 in back rent or she'd be on the street. She'd been juggling bills like a circus performer, but this month her car had needed repairs, and she'd had to choose between rent and transportation to her jobs. She'd chosen wrong. That morning, she showed up to Rosie's with red-rimmed eyes and hands that wouldn't stop shaking. But she tied on her apron, forced on her smile, and got to work. At 6:47 a.m., the old man shuffled in. "Morning, sir," Cassie said, her voice cracking slightly. "Your usual?" The old man studied her face with more intensity than usual. "What's wrong, child?" "Nothing, I'm fine," Cassie lied, turning away quickly. But the old man reached out and gently caught her wrist. "Cassie. Tell me." And something about the kindness in his voice, the genuine concern from this man who had even less than she did, broke something in her. The tears came fast and hard. "I'm getting evicted," she whispered, collapsing into the booth across from him. "I don't know what to do. I work so hard, I work all the time, and it's never enough. It's never fucking enough." The old man let her cry, just sitting there, being present in her pain. "How much do you need?" he asked finally. Cassie laughed bitterly. $1,800. Might as well be 18 million. The old man was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached into his threadbare cardigan and pulled out a small, worn notebook and a pen. "Give me your landlord's name and address," he said. "What?" "No, I wasn't, I didn't tell you this because I wanted." "I know you didn't," the old man said firmly. "But you've been buying me breakfast for months, lying about throwing food away, making sure I have heat and coffee. Let me do this one thing. Please." "You don't have $1,800, Cassie said gently. "I know you don't. It's okay. I'll figure something out." The old man smiled mysteriously. "You'd be surprised what an old man can do." "The name, Cassie." Reluctantly, Cassie wrote down the information, not believing for a second that anything would come of it but not wanting to hurt his feelings by refusing. "Thank you," she whispered. "No," the old man said, patting her hand. "Thank you. For every morning. For every kindness. For seeing me when I needed to be seen." The following Tuesday, Cassie arrived at work with a heavy heart. The eviction was in 3 days, and she still hadn't figured out a solution. She'd been looking at her car, wondering if she could sell it, live in a shelter, somehow find a way to survive. But 6:47 a.m. came and went. No old man. 6:50, still nothing. 7 a.m. The corner booth remained empty. Cassie tried not to panic, but a cold dread settled in her stomach. In 3 months, he'd never once missed a Tuesday or Thursday. Maybe he's sick, she told herself. Maybe he just overslept. But she knew. Somehow, she knew. Thursday came. No old man. The following Tuesday. Empty booth. Cassie was devastated. She realized she didn't even know his name, where he lived, if he was okay. He'd been such a constant in her life, and now he was just gone. Probably kicked the bucket, Destiny said callously. He looked old as hell. Cassie wanted to slap her but settled for walking away before she did something she'd regret. On the Thursday of the second week, Cassie was mindlessly wiping down tables when the bell above the diner door chimed. She looked up and froze. 2 men in expensive suits walked in, followed by 4 massive men in dark suits and sunglasses who were very obviously bodyguards. The diner went silent. Even Tommy stopped cooking to stare. "We're looking for Cassie Martinez," one of the suited men said, his voice carrying authority. Cassie's first thought was that she was in trouble. Maybe the old man had been someone important, and she'd somehow offended him. Maybe. "That's me," she said shakily, her mind racing through possibilities. The man who'd spoken, distinguished, probably in his 50s, with salt and pepper hair and piercing gray eyes, stepped forward and extended his hand. "Ms. Martinez, my name is Gerald Stevenson. I'm the senior partner at Stevenson and Associates. This is Marcus Chen, head of security. We need to speak with you about a very important matter. Is there somewhere private we can talk? Cassie looked at Tommy, who just shrugged. We can use the back office, I guess, she said, her voice small. The whole entourage moved to Rosie's tiny, cluttered office. The bodyguards positioned themselves at the door. Gerald and Marcus sat across from Cassie, who felt like she might throw up. Am I in trouble? She blurted out. Gerald's stern face softened into a slight smile. No, Ms. Martinez. Quite the opposite. We're here about Harrison Caldwell. Who? You would know him as the old man who came here every Tuesday and Thursday morning. Cassie's heart clenched. Is he okay? Where is he? I've been so worried. Mr. Caldwell passed away 2 weeks ago, Gerald said gently. Cassie felt like she'd been punched. Tears immediately sprang to her eyes. No. No, he can't. He died peacefully in his sleep, Marcus added. No pain. And he'd been talking about you right up until the end. I didn't even know his name, Cassie sobbed. He was just the old man. I never. Gerald slid a handkerchief across the desk. Ms. Martinez, Mr. Caldwell knew exactly what he was doing. For the past 3 months, we've been documenting your interactions with him. Every kindness, every moment of compassion, every time you went out of your way to make him feel human. Cassie looked up, confused. You were watching us? Why? Because, Gerald said carefully, Harrison Caldwell was not a homeless man. He was the founder and former CEO of Caldwell Industries. His net worth at the time of his death was approximately $8.4 billion. The room spun. Cassie gripped the edge of the desk. 8 billion? Mr. Caldwell spent the last years of his life conducting what he called the greatest social experiment of his life, Gerald continued. He wanted to see how people treated him when they thought he had nothing. He visited hundreds of establishments, thousands of interactions. And do you know what he found? Cassie couldn't speak. Couldn't process. Cruelty, Gerald said flatly. Indifference. People stepping over him, ignoring him, treating him like garbage. Except for you. Marcus leaned forward. You were the only person, Ms. Martinez. In 3 years of this experiment, across 12 states and over 100 cities. You were the only person who consistently treated him with dignity, kindness, and genuine care. Who spent your own money to feed him? Who sat with him when you had other tables? Who saw him as human? I don't understand, Cassie whispered. Why are you telling me this? Gerald pulled out a thick manila envelope. Because Harrison Caldwell changed his will 5 months ago. And you, Cassie Martinez, are now one of the primary beneficiaries. Cassie stared at the envelope like it might explode. Beneficiary? That doesn't make sense. Gerald opened the envelope and pulled out legal documents that looked intimidating as hell. I'm going to read you the relevant section of Mr. Caldwell's last will and testament. To Cassie Martinez, the young woman at Rosie's diner who treated me like I mattered when the world told her I didn't, I leave the following: the full amount of my debts paid in perpetuity, a trust fund of $5 million for her personal use, an additional $10 million to be used exclusively for completing her education and any career advancement she desires, and a position on the board of directors of the Caldwell Foundation with an annual salary of $250,000, where her lived experience with poverty and her demonstrated compassion will guide our charitable giving for decades to come. Cassie couldn't breathe. The numbers were so large they didn't even sound real. There's more, Gerald continued. Asterisk, I also leave her ownership of the building that houses Rosie's diner and the surrounding properties, which she may do with as she sees fit. And finally, I leave her a letter, which I hope explains why a simple act of kindness means more than all the wealth I've accumulated in my 83 years on this earth. Gerald slid a handwritten letter across the desk. Cassie picked it up with shaking hands and began to read. My dearest Cassie. If you're reading this, I'm gone. And you're probably in shock. Let me explain. I spent 60 years building an empire. I was ruthless, calculating, and successful. I had everything money could buy and nothing money couldn't. But my wife died 20 years ago, and my children, well, they showed their true colors when the will was read. They fought like vultures over money that meant nothing. So I conducted an experiment. I dressed like I had nothing and went out into the world to see how people would treat me. What I found broke my heart. I was invisible. Worse than invisible, I was an inconvenience. People literally stepped over me. Security guards followed me. Managers asked me to leave their establishments. For 3 years, I documented this. I wanted proof of what I suspected, that our society has lost its humanity. And then I met you. You, with your grease-stained apron and tired eyes. You, who smiled at me like I was somebody. You, who paid for my food out of tips you desperately needed. You, who sat with me and talked to me and made me feel human again. You did this expecting nothing. Gaining nothing. You did it because it was right. Cassie, that kind of goodness is rarer than all the diamonds in the world. And it needs to be rewarded, not because you did it for reward, but because the world needs to know that kindness matters. Use this money to build the life you deserve. Go back to school. Become the nurse you were meant to be. Help others the way you helped me. And when people ask you why a billionaire left you his fortune, tell them the truth, because you saw him when everyone else looked away. That's worth more than money could ever measure. With all my gratitude and respect, Harrison Caldwell. By the time Cassie finished reading, she was openly sobbing. Gerald and Marcus sat quietly, letting her process. Your rent has been paid, Gerald said finally. Your debt has been eliminated. We've set up accounts for you, and we have financial advisors ready to help you manage everything. But there's one more thing. He pulled out a USB drive. Mr. Caldwell wanted you to see this. Later that day, in a private office at Stevenson & Associates, Cassie watched footage that would change how she saw everything. There was Harrison, her old man, but different. Standing in a glass office, wearing an expensive suit, looking powerful and healthy. The video was dated 6 months ago. If you're watching this, Cassie, Harrison said on the screen, then my experiment is complete, and you know the truth. He sat down, suddenly looking every bit his 83 years. I want to show you something. I want you to see what I saw. The video cut to surveillance footage. Location after location, Harrison dressed as a homeless man, being treated like trash. Security guards shoving him. Waitresses ignoring him. People literally stepping over him on sidewalks. One horrifying clip showed someone throwing coffee on him. This is what poverty looks like in America, Harrison's voice narrated. This is how we treat our most vulnerable. Then the footage changed. Rosie's diner. The first time Cassie had served him. Watching herself on camera was surreal. Cassie saw what Harrison had seen, a young woman, exhausted, barely holding it together, but still managing genuine kindness. She watched herself sneak him extra food. Watched herself sit with him during her break, talking to him like a person, not a problem. Do you see it? Harrison's voice asked. Do you see what I saw? A soul that hasn't been corrupted by hardship. Someone who chose compassion when cruelty would have been easier. The montage continued, months of interactions, all catalogued, all documented. The world told you I was worthless, Harrison continued. Society said I was invisible. But you looked at me and saw a human being who deserved dignity. That's revolutionary, Cassie. That's rare. That's precious. The video cut back to Harrison in his office. I'm leaving you my fortune not because I pity you, but because you've proven you understand what it's for. Money is a tool. It can build or destroy. In the wrong hands, it corrupts. In the right hands, it changes lives. He leaned forward, looking directly at the camera. Your hands are the right hands, Cassie. Use this gift to become who you were always meant to be. Help others the way you helped me. And know that an old man died believing that goodness still exists in this world because you showed it to him every Tuesday and Thursday at 6:47 a.m. The video ended with Harrison smiling, genuinely happy in a way Cassie had never seen in person. She sat in the dark office, crying, processing, trying to understand how her life had completely changed. Cassie stood outside the newly renovated Rosie's diner, except it wasn't called Rosie's anymore. The new sign read, Harrison's Place, where everyone matters. She'd kept the diner but transformed it. It was now a non-profit restaurant where people paid what they could afford. If you had money, great. If you didn't, you ate anyway. No questions. No judgment. Just food and dignity. Cassie had also gone back to school. She was enrolled in an accelerated nursing program and would have her RN in 18 months. The Caldwell Foundation was funding 300 other students from poverty backgrounds in similar programs. But the biggest change was in Cassie herself. She stood taller now. Smiled easier. The weight of constant fear had lifted, replaced by purpose. A young man in tattered clothes shuffled up to the diner entrance, hesitating. Cassie walked over with a warm smile. Morning. Come on in. You're just in time for breakfast. I don't have any money, the man admitted, ashamed. That's okay, Cassie said gently, holding the door open. We've got plenty. Come have some coffee, warm up. You matter here. As the man's eyes filled with tears of gratitude, Cassie thought about Harrison. About how one person's kindness could ripple outward, changing everything. She'd learned the truth Harrison spent his last years documenting: wealth doesn't determine worth, and the smallest acts of compassion can mean absolutely everything. Because sometimes, the old man at the corner table isn't just an old man. Sometimes, he's a test. And sometimes, passing that test changes not just your life, but the world.